Last day.
That's right. So great. You will have time to do things then. So that's great. This is a perfect tour to take.
Yeah.
And of course, because of pandemic and various things, there are many things that are not actually operating fully, but we'll talk you through what you can see.
Okay.
Yes.
Not used to keys. My vehicle, I have a key fob in my pocket, and that's good. This van, you've got to have the key.
That's right.
Oh, here we go.
All right. Well, welcome to Calgary.
Thank you.
So our tour actually begins. We will talk about the Glenbow Museum. Sorry. Oh, I see there's a wedding on our left. The Glenbow Museum is the largest in Western Canada. However, it is currently closed. They've closed for 3 years to do a whole bunch of renovations. So unfortunately, you're not able to go in, but it is just up ahead on the left-hand side. They do have a huge exhibit of Western culture, the Indigenous people, and a lot of collections. The gentleman, Mr. Harvey, was actually a lawyer in the city. He started collecting things. He loved to collect items. And then eventually they discovered oil and gas on his property, and he became very wealthy and started the Glenbow Museum, which is right here on your left-hand side. One of the things he liked to collect actually was suits of armor. So you'll find that in the museum as well, and it's always kind of interesting and looks a little out of place, but it's interesting to see them. To your left here, you'll see this brick all the way down the street. This is called Arts Commons. This is a concentration of 5 of the live theaters in Calgary, and we do have live theater all around Calgary, but this would be 5 of them. The largest is Theatre Calgary, and it is in here. Alberta Theatre Projects is our second largest theater, and it's in here as well. Now, as we turn the corner here, you will see on your right-hand side when we turn, the blue building. Right now, you can kind of see it kitty corner from where we're sitting. This blue building that looks like it was built out of glass is actually the municipal building. It is where all of the city workers have their offices. It is also situated with a little plaza out front, and that plaza is called the Municipal Plaza, so a little bit like Nathan Phillips. There's also through the plaza here on the right, you'll see down ahead the sandstone building. That building is actually City Hall. It was built between 1907 and 1911, and the mayor and aldermen still have their offices in that building. It was built out of sandstone, and it was Paskapoo sandstone, and we will talk a bit more about Paskapoo sandstone later on the tour. Now, across the street from City Hall on the left-hand side, as we drive through this intersection, you're going to see another plaza on the left. That plaza is Olympic Plaza. I can see there are people out there skating right now. So Olympic Plaza was actually built It was actually built for the 1988 Winter Olympics, and so the stage that is here on the left was actually where all the medal ceremonies took place during the Olympics. Now, we use this year-round. Right now there are some people out there skating, so it is a nice skating place in the wintertime. In the summer, it is a splash pond for kids, and then we will use it throughout the year for various festivals and celebrations as well. And it's also one of the locations during the Calgary Stampede that you can come and get a free Stampede breakfast. So we'll talk a little bit more about the Stampede and breakfast as we travel through the city today. So if you have any questions, just throw them out, and if I'm going to talk about it later on the tour, I'll let you know. Otherwise, I will find a moment to answer your questions.
Sure.
Are you staying in the downtown core?
Yeah.
Oh, you are. Awesome. You've noticed already, I'm sure, that the downtown core kind of closes down at the end of the workday or weekends, and it's there's a lot more activity in outside parts of Calgary than there is in the downtown.
Where are you staying?
The Sheraton.
Oh, the Fairmont Palliser?
No, not the Sheraton downtown.
Oh, Sheraton. Okay.
I'm sorry, not
Marriott.
Sheraton. Marriott downtown.
Marriott. Okay.
Marriott downtown.
It's one of those 3 hotels.
Yeah.
You keep saying Sheraton.
Yeah, I know. How far is Edmonton from here?
It's about an hour and about 3 to 3.5 hour drive.
Oh, that's
north.
far. That's far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But certainly doable in a day
Yeah.
if you want to rent a car and go up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's very common for people to do that.
Yeah.
It's a full day, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But I also understand that car rentals are very expensive right now as well,
Oh.
because there aren't as many vehicles available these days. A lot of the rental companies sold off a lot of their vehicles during the pandemic, and now they're having a hard time replacing them.
Because of the key chip shortage and all that.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, so we have a lot of construction in Calgary. You'll see that as we travel through the city. We do have 2 rivers here in the city. One's the Bow River and one is the Elbow River. We're going to see both rivers during our travels today. The first river we're going to see is the Bow River, and that will be just up ahead here as we go over this bridge. You will notice the river will be on either side of us, but you will actually get to see it more clearly on the left-hand side.
Lucky me, I'm on the left.
Now when you see the Bow River, you'll notice that it has a little bit of a green coloring to it. And the reason for that is because it is actually a glacier-fed river that comes from a glacier out by Banff. It's called Bow Glacier. It is a very, very cold water, and in the summertime it's used quite a bit for rafting. It is also one of the top rivers in the world for fly fishing. We do have rainbow trout and brown trout in our river. Now, the river is also used for a lot of irrigation, and there's several dams along the way as well. Our public transportation in the city consists of buses and the C train. You will hear a lot of people talk about the C train, which stands for Calgary Train, or the LRT, which is Light Rail Transit, or just the train. All 3 terms is the same. It's all the C train. We have 2 lines, a red line and a blue line. Right now, if you take a look at the boulevard on the left, you'll see one of the stations, and this is the blue line. Just further up ahead would be the zoo station. That's the station that you would get off, obviously, for the zoo, but it will also take you to TELUS Park, which is the Science Center in Calgary. So we will see both of those locations on the tour here. The Calgary Zoo begins here on the right-hand side across the river. We have about 93 acres of land here for our zoo, and it is one of the better zoos of Canada. So we will talk a little bit more about our zoo as we come back from TELUS Park. They did actually build in here a prehistoric park, which all the little kids really love to come and check it out, because there are dinosaurs here, but there's also some buttons that you can push. And when you push the buttons, the dinosaurs will roar and move, and the kids all giggle because they love that kind of thing. And but if you are very interested in the dinosaurs, one of the areas that you can go to is Drumheller. It's about an hour and a half east of Calgary, and there are companies that will do tours out that way as well. And that is actually where they first discovered the dinosaurs and the dinosaur bones. They have created a really amazing museum there. It's called the Royal Tyrrell Museum, and any dinosaur bones or fossils that are found have to go there first, and they will examine them and determine whether they want to keep them.
What is the population? 1 million?
Sorry?
Population?
Population? Okay, we're going to get into the population actually shortly here. Yes, very good. So downtown Calgary has some of the highest parking in North America prior to the pandemic. It's really come down since the pandemic hit, but we were really, really expensive. And so a lot of people discovered that you could come here, park in the zoo parking lot on our right, and take the C train to work, and you didn't have to pay those huge costs. However, the zoo caught on, and now you do have to pay to park here, but it's still pretty inexpensive to park. And you'd also get greeted by our lovely gorilla at the gate on the right. This gorilla was modeled after a gorilla that we had in the zoo for over 20 years. He did die of natural causes recently, and so he is now part of our public art and will be part of the zoo forever. We're now coming into Telus Spark, and this is the Science Center. It was it opened in 2011, did cost $160 million to build, and all three levels of government contributed money to this, as well as private donors. When they built this, they did build it on an old landfill, and there is methane gas on the property. So they've built in gauges in here to monitor the methane gas levels. But being that it is a science center, I think it's kind of perfect that there's methane gas on the property. But it is a little scary that they named it Telus Spark. It is actually dedicated to kids and to science and experiments, but one night a month they do have an adults only evening, so no kids are allowed to come, and you can come here, get a glass of wine, try your hand at some experiments, and just go through the science center. And I always say, you know, if your experiments aren't all that great or you can't think of any, just have a second glass of wine, because you are on a night out, so enjoy it. To the left again is our zoo parking lot. Our Zoological Society was formed in 1929, and it is the oldest registered charity in the province of Alberta. We do get over 1 million people a year that will come to our zoo. We have about 700 animals, making up approximately 130 different species. The zoo is open every day of the year except Christmas Day, so it is a very popular place to come. We have very interesting animals here. We do have a whole sort of Western Canada area. We also have area for the tigers. We have the penguins. We have lemurs. We have a whole African exhibit here as well. They have some interesting programs where kids who are part of scouts or hockey teams or anything like that, if you're a part of a group, you can apply to come and spend the night at the zoo, and you sleep in the little pavilion where you would find the hippos, and see what happens with hippos overnight, because they're pretty active at nighttime. So of course nobody gets sleep, but the kids get a really great education. We're just in the process of getting our polar bears back. They took away the polar bears in 1999, and they are bringing them back next year, so we're excited to have our polar bears back. Now we're coming on to Memorial Drive. Memorial Drive did get its name back in 1927. The city wanted to remember fallen soldiers of World War I, and they talked about perhaps doing some statues, but in the end they really wanted it to be a living memorial. So they provided a tree to the families of the fallen soldiers. They planted a tree along Memorial Drive here, and in that first year we did plant 900 trees, and by year 5 we had planted 1,700 trees. And then in the year 2000 they were looking at the trees, and they realized we were losing a lot of our trees due to various reasons, and so they wanted this living memorial to continue, so they did take cuttings off of the trees and planted the second generation of these trees about 7 years later. So we do now still have our living memorial. Just further up ahead is an actual memorial where they during November they will set up the crosses and the poppies, and it is a location on November 11th where we do remembrance ceremonies. So we'll be coming back into downtown. We will stay in this side of downtown, which is the east end. We'll just drive around this end a little bit, show you a few things here, and then we will be heading out over to a hill where we will have our first stop and a view of Calgary. Now as we go across this bridge, you're going to see the pillars on the right that have paintings on them. This was part of a program that the city has where they will have a theme and they will have artists paint these, and then they'll change them out every 2 years or so. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. On your left you'll see a pathway. This is the most extensive pathway system in North America. We have over 1,000 kilometers of paths and bike paths that connect the entire city. You'll also see a little bit more of these arts paintings on the pillars. So the theme for this particular one was facelessness or homelessness, and often when we see a homeless person, we don't see their face. It's more like they're wearing a mask. So that's what this is a dedication to the homeless. The area we're in is East Village. This was an industrial area in the early 1900s, and then eventually a lot of the buildings in this area were torn down. The building on our left, the Simmons building, is a building that survived the teardown in the 1950s, and it is where they would have made mattresses and bedding back in the day. They were here till the 1960s. This became a really bad area for many years, and then about 10 years ago the city invested $357 million into revitalizing East Village. Most of the buildings that you see now are newer buildings here within the last 10 years. Over in the Simmons building we had some restaurants that came in. So there's a coffee shop in there. There's also a steakhouse and a little bistro as well. So a lot of businesses have started to move into this area, and they've really revitalized the area quite considerably. Now as you look around here, you'll see more public art. We are going to talk about public art later on the tour today. On your left, you'll see Studio Bell. Studio Bell was one of the buildings that they invested money in to revitalize the area. It opened in the spring of 2016 and is the National Music Centre of Canada. We have 3 Canadian Music Hall of Fames in there, as well as a little concert hall. It's a very interactive museum. They did announce that they will only be open on weekends, so if you're interested in going there, tomorrow is a good day to go. It is free until the end of the year, so you do find some time to go in. It's really interesting. The bridge that you see up above from Studio Bell, that actually has solar panels in it. There are various tones or vibrations that will happen based on the weather. So if the weather is sunny, you'll have a certain tone or vibration. If it clouds over, that changes. Below the bridge, you'll see a brick building. That brick building is the King Edward Hotel. It will be on our right as we travel down the street here. The King Edward Hotel was actually the blues bar back in its day. This is where B.B. King would actually come and play music. So it did become the blues bar at one point. Now, because of that musical history, when they built Studio Bell, they really wanted to incorporate the musical history of the King Edward. So they did take it down. They cleaned up the bricks. They rebuilt it on the footprint where it was originally and connected the history to Studio Bell. In the King Edward today, there's a bit of a bistro in there. There's a studio space that musicians can actually book so that they can record their music as well. And you can get a whole history of the King Edward while you're in there. One of the other buildings that they invested in was our new public library that opened in November of 2018. And you might think that the building up ahead on our left would be the new public library, but in fact it is not. It is a parking garage that just recently opened. The library is here on our right-hand side. The big white building that you see on our right is our new public library. When they built this library, they wanted it to be a gathering place or a meeting place, not just a library. So it is an area that has all kinds of meeting rooms in here. This is also known as the gateway to East Village because of the lovely archway here. There's some indigenous art as you come into the building. This building was a $240 million building, and when they actually did the groundbreaking for it, they had already raised $1 million for this building. The glass shapes that you see here is representing of our Chinook winds that we get in Calgary, and we'll talk a little bit more about the Chinooks later today. You will also notice that the sea train goes under the library as well, and that would be the red line that goes that way. There's about 50,000 books in the library, and there are areas for the little kids to come and enjoy the library. There's computer labs, there's areas for teens to play their games, their video games as well. So a beautiful, beautiful, stunning library. When before it opened, it was named in the Architecture magazine as one of the top 12 most anticipated buildings to open in 2018. And after it opened in the first 3 months, we had 500,000 people come and look at the library. So do take a moment to wander through when you have some time. It's a gorgeous library. All right, we're back in East Village here. You can see some of the new buildings again. Calgary actually exists today because of the railway. Way back in 1867, when Canada became a country, we had 4 provinces that joined Confederation. We really wanted British Columbia to join, but they took their time to decide, and eventually they did agree to join. But they made the Canadian government promise to continue building the railway all the way to the Port of Vancouver. And at the time, the railway only came to Winnipeg. So the government promised, but that created 2 major problems for them. The first problem was that they did have to negotiate with First Nations peoples across the prairies in order to build, to get the land through a treaty so that they could actually build the railway. Their second problem here was that we did have fur traders that were up here from the States, and they were trading whiskey to the First Nations people for their bison robes, and that became extremely problematic. So the government formed a police force called the Northwest Mounted Police, and they marched out this way from Winnipeg. It took them 2 years to get here, and they found the confluence of the 2 rivers, built Fort Calgary here on the left-hand side. Now originally, when the fur traders heard that the police force was coming, they didn't want to stick around and wait for the police force, so they left. And so by the time the Northwest Mounted Police arrived, there wasn't a huge need for them to settle the area because it was already starting to get settled. But they were also part of the team that was here to negotiate with the First Nations to acquire the treaty. If you take a look to the left, you'll see that there are various poles in the ground. That will represent where some of the original buildings were. Those were torn down many, many years ago. You'll also notice that there is a gray and red building there. That is a replica of the barracks that would have been here. And then there's a little gray and white building, and that is the interpretive center. And they do a really great job of explaining what life was like here prior to the railway arriving. Now, as we go across this bridge, look to your left. You'll see the river over there. So we're just going over the Elbow River, and it would join with the Bow River down at the end, and that was the confluence of the two rivers. It's harder to see now because they're building that new bridge, and they're getting a lot more of it put there. So eventually we'll have a new bridge to go over. I think it's supposed to be ready in 2022, I think. Or was it 23? I can't remember. I just heard something about that. Okay, we're in Inglewood. Inglewood is the first commercial district of Calgary and is the first neighborhood. So this Inglewood really dates back to the late or early 1880s. Now, when people first heard the railway was coming through, they thought that the railway would build their station on this side of the river, because on the other side was the fort, so there's no way the government would allow them to build over there. So they thought this would become downtown Calgary, and they started to build buildings here. A lot of people moved into this area, and then all of a sudden the railway made the announcement that no, they were actually going to build their station on the other side of the river, right where we picked you up actually. So this did actually grow though as a commercial district, and you'll see that these buildings all have the big storefront windows on the bottom, and then the upper levels would have been either apartments or offices. Now, over time, this area really got run down. 70s and 80s, it was a bad area to come to. But the city really did revitalize the area, and a lot of businesses moved in here to clean it up as well. So as you're looking around at the buildings, you'll notice a lot of really interesting, unique shops. And most of these shops, this is the only place in the city that you will actually find them. Although there are a few coffee shop chains that are in here and a few things like that, but you will find a lot of mom and pop type shops here, everything from coffee shops to fine dining and all kinds of art galleries, and pretty well, you know, anything that you're looking for you can probably find here in Inglewood. Now, in 2014, city planners across the country had a contest, and they asked all city planners to actually submit a neighborhood that they felt had become a desirable neighborhood in their city. And so we entered Inglewood, and back in 2014, Inglewood actually won. So Inglewood became the most desirable neighborhood in Canada that year. Now, of course, when that kind of thing happens, your property values go skyrocketing. Here in Calgary, the average home price is approximately $550,000. And in Inglewood, a lot of homes here will start there at that range and work its way up. In fact, there are homes in this neighborhood that are valued over $1 million. Now, sometimes you might find a good bargain and find something under $550,000 here, but a lot of them are in that price range. She wants to be on her scooter to get across the street. Now, being that this was one of the first was the first neighborhood of Calgary, we do have some major history in this area. There was a gentleman here who his name was A.E. Cross, and he was actually a rancher in the area, had an accident and couldn't ranch any longer, so he reinvented himself and he built the first brewery in Western Canada here in Inglewood. His home was just across the street on the right hand side. You'll see that beautiful house. Today that is actually a fine dining French restaurant called the Rouge. But A.E. Cross actually lived there with his family, raised family there and lived. That was the only home that they lived in their entire married life. He did give a lot of people in this neighborhood work through the brewery, as well as he did buy a hotel here as well, so that he had a market for his brewery, for his beer as well. He was one of the first, one of the 4 people who put up prize money for the Calgary Stampede, for that original 1912 Stampede. When we get up to the hill, we will talk a little bit more about Stampede. You'll notice here on the street corner, if you take a look at the signs by the lights, you'll see that, for example, the one ahead of us says 9th Avenue, formerly Atlantic Avenue. To our right, you'll see 12th Street, formerly McLeod Street. So when the city revitalizes some of the older areas, they like to keep the names that the streets were called originally, so you will see those signs in some of the restored areas of the city. The railway came through Calgary in 1883, and by that point, Calgary had been incorporated as a little town in 1884. So a year after the railway came through, we had about 500 people back then. 10 years later, with the railway coming here and a lot of settlers coming out this way, we actually were incorporated as a city in 1894 of 3,900 people, and then today we are 1.4 million people. Now when the railway came through, they did build their station across the river, but on this side of the river they did build their yard, and so the area we're in now is Ramsey, and a lot of people who lived in Ramsey in the early days actually worked for the railway yards. So you'll see when we turn the corner up ahead, there a lot of the homes that are here would have been homes that those people would have lived in back in those early days. Ramsey is also one of the older areas of Calgary. Now on the left-hand side, you're going to see some interesting buildings here. So look at the one about halfway down. You'll see the lovely sunrise on the balcony up above. And then we have up ahead here, we have a couple of small houses that are joined with a gutter between the two of them. So obviously some of the older homes of the area. As we go up the hill, you'll see how housing has actually changed over the years. Now up on the left-hand side, right now you're going to see a lot of trees, but as that clears, you're going to see a brown house. Take a look at his balconies. He's got 2 verandas, basically, one on top of the house and one just down below it. Now usually when you're doing that, you're trying to get the height so that you will actually have a really good view. And if you take a look to the left and look at that view, it is not a very pretty view. It's a very industrial view. But in actual fact, that's not the view that he really wanted. The view he wants is the one that is directly ahead of us. Now we will be coming to a platform where we will be stopping. Ken will get the door for us and we will get out, and I will talk to you about everything that you see below, and then we will give you time for some photos. So you can leave everything you want in the vehicle, just bring your camera or your phone so you can take some photos.
Hey, what is this place called? Right here?
Sorry?
What is the name of this place right here?
Well, this is called Scotsman Hill, and we'll talk about Scotsman Hill
okay.
on the way out.
Okay, got it.
So funny because it was frozen and the seagulls were walking on water. All right, so as I said to you, this is known as Scotsman Hill, and there's a couple theories as to why it's called Scotsman Hill. One theory was that back in the early days of Calgary, there was a gentleman who was from Scotland that lived up here, and he homesteaded up on the hill. That could be one theory. The second theory is that when the Calgary Stampede began, frugal Calgarians would come up to the hill, and they would sit there and watch the fireworks at night and not have to pay to get into the Calgary Stampede. So that is actually my favorite theory as to why it's Scotsman's Hill. So we're just going to drive around Stampede Park, and you can see it from the ground level. How big the grandstand is from here. Just up ahead here on the right hand side, in this little cluster of trees, you're going to see a miniature chuck wagon right here on the right. Chuck wagons were really important back in the day because as a rancher, your ranch hands would be out on the ranch for days at a time taking care of the cattle or taking them from one pasture to the next. And so they would always have to have their food with them. The food would always be put into one wagon, and that the driver of that wagon would have been the cook, and often his nickname was Cookie. And the reason it's called a chuck wagon is because the cowboy slang word for food is chuck, and so that's why it's a chuck wagon. Now you'll see here on our right we have a C-train station. The Stampede Park has two C-train stations, one here, one further up ahead. We do get approximately 1.2 to 1.4 million people that come through the gates during the 10 days of Stampede. I see we have some traffic happening here. Ambulance. We're coming up to on our right is the Big 4 building, and this building was dedicated to those 4 gentlemen who put up the original prize money for the Calgary Stampede. The C-train that you see on our right, this is the red line, so it will go down to the south end of Calgary.
Weekends is when they like to do construction and shut things down because there's less traffic.
Or so the theory goes.
Well, yeah.
Saturdays there's not less traffic. Wow.
Have you ever been out to the Stampede?
No.
It is a lot of fun.
When was the last time? Yeah, the stampede was. I think due to COVID, there was none last year. Right?
We didn't do it last year, but we did do it this year at 50% capacity.
Oh, okay.
And last year was the first time since it
Yes.
started.
Their history is the first time they've had to close. It's a shame. Now, because of the BMO and the construction that I mentioned to you, they are actually building a new LRT station just up ahead. So we'll point that out when we eventually get there. We'll get through the traffic here. It's dedicated to Guy Wiedeck, whose idea it was to actually start this Calgary Stampede. And then on the right, you're also going to start to see some of that construction that we were talking about. The BMO Center, I believe that they're supposed to be opening in 2022, but I've also heard 23, so I'm not quite sure when it is. Oh, and our TP is gone, Ken.
Posting out for weeks.
Well, a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Couple of weeks. So just here, the C train station here is going to be, they're removing this because this is going to now be an entrance into the BMO Center, and they're readjusting the platform for the C train just to further up ahead a bit. Now in the Beltline area. The Beltline is also known as the Warehouse District. So just up ahead, as we go through this next intersection, on the right-hand side, you'll see a brick and sandstone building here. This was actually the customs building back in the early days of Calgary. So when the railway came through, it was actually the Pacific Railway, and it was going east-west across the country. And then a few years later, we got another railway called the Grand Trunk that was going north-south. And so Calgary did become a hub city. And because of that, a lot of supplies were coming into the area, and we started to build warehouses in this area to take a lot of the supplies. And then there was down in behind the buildings, there was actually a rail track that was built so that the trains could bring a few cars in and either unload into the warehouse or load up, depending on which direction it was going. Now over time, these warehouses have been repurposed. Some of them are lofts, so people do live in some of them, and a lot of them have been repurposed into various offices. The Beltline is a very populated area and always has been. You can see there's a lot of high-rise buildings here, a lot of apartments, condos in this area as well. So a lot of young people will live in this particular area because they're only a few blocks from downtown Calgary, so they can walk to work. And this has really become the nightlife area, more so than downtown Calgary. Now we are heading over to one of the last remaining Victorian mansions in Western Canada. It belonged to a family called Lougheed, James and Isabella Lougheed. James was a young lawyer that came to the city in 1883, started his law practice, did get a contract with the railway, and so his law practice really took off very quickly. In the first year of being here, he met and married Isabella Hardesty, and Isabella was the daughter of the chief factor of the Hudson's Bay Company, so she came from a very, very influential family. Now, shortly after they were married, James was appointed to the Senate, and because of the work that he did with the Senate, he did start a lot of hospitals for war vets, and because of that he was knighted and was the only Albertan to ever be knighted. And shortly after he was knighted, a few years later, we stopped knighting Canadians. We now have the Order of Canada instead. James and Isabella did a lot of entertaining. Of course, being a senator, he would go back and forth to Ottawa quite a bit, and so eventually, because of all the entertaining they were doing, they realized that their house was too small for entertaining. So they built a mansion outside of the little town of Calgary at the time. Calgary actually didn't become a town till 1884, and this house, or city, until 1894, sorry, and the house was built in 1891. You will see it just up ahead across the street on the right hand side. You will see the Lougheed Mansion. It is a 14,000 square foot home. It does have a museum in it. There's also a restaurant. It's open Thursday through Sunday, and the restaurant is open the same time as the museum is open. It also, a lot of events happen here, so the house is rented out in the evenings for weddings and various celebrations. It is a national and provincial historic site as well. And the gardens that you will see here on the right are really beautiful in the summertime, and a lot of weddings will happen here over the summer. This garden was the pride and joy of Lady Isabella, and was the first thing to be restored when they started to restore the property. So the gardens were restored first. There's one head gardener and about up to 40 different volunteers that will come 3 mornings a week during the summer to take care of the beautiful gardens. Now the upper portion where the house is all run by the province of Alberta. The lower portion where the gardens are, that's run by the city of Calgary. The family lived here between 1891 and 1936. James was also a land agent for the railway as well as the Hudson's Bay Company. He did have a lot of real estate investments himself. And when we hit the dirty 30s and the mid-20s, Calgary had an economic downturn as well. And Lougheed started to sell off a lot of their properties and real estate because they needed to pay the taxes on the house. Eventually, in 1925, James passed away, and 10 years later, in 1935, all of their real estate investments had actually been sold off to pay the property taxes for the house, and Lady Isabella could no longer afford the taxes on the house, so she lost it to the city. The city then allowed her to live there until she passed away the following year in 1936. And after she passed away, they came in and sold off everything that was in the house. Eventually, the Canadian Women's Army Corps took over the house, and then after them, the Red Cross moved in. And then there was a period of time where no one was living in the house, and it really fell to pieces, basically. There was a caretaker that came in at one point to take care of things, but eventually they formed the Lougheed House Conservation Society and restored the house to its natural beauty. Certainly nothing like Casa Loma in Toronto, but in Western Canada it is one of the last remaining Victorian mansions. Now this whole area was actually part of the Northwest Territories until 1905, and James Lougheed was very instrumental in the conversations around forming Alberta as a province. Because we were Northwest Territories, we were really a lot of prairie, a lot of grasslands in this area, no trees. The trees were all planted in the city, so as you look around Calgary, you'll see a lot of trees here. And it really was because of a gentleman named William Reeder. William was actually the superintendent of parks and cemeteries in the early 1900s. There was at the time a beautification movement that was going through North America, and he really loved that whole idea of the beautification, and part of that was to have trees and flowers in your cities. So he had made a ruling that any time you built a subdivision in the city, you had to have a boulevard, and on that boulevard you had to have trees, and it is because of that that we have all the trees that we currently have in the city. Even today that rule still stands. Now just across the street on the left-hand side you'll see a park. This is Central Memorial Park. This park was the very first park in Calgary, and of course because this was the very populated area, all of the neighborhood would come down and really enjoy the park. There was at one point a bandstand in the park. Unfortunately, it's no longer here. William Reeder designed this park, and he spent about 20 years cultivating it, planting it, and just developing it into a beautiful garden area for people to enjoy. It was also an area where in the summer, at Christmas, they would raise a huge Christmas tree here, and the whole neighborhood would come down and decorate the tree and really get into that. On the left, you'll see another big sandstone building. This building is the Central Memorial Library. It was built in 1912 and is Alberta's very first library. Now, there was a lady in the city who thought it would be very important for Calgary to have a library, and she heard about a gentleman in the States named Andrew Carnegie, who was offering to send money to any community that wanted to build a library. He was a self-made millionaire. He was also self-taught, so books were very important to Andrew. So Anna wrote him a letter and asked him if he would be interested in sending money to Canada so that we could build a library. And he wrote back and said, yes, I will do that. But there is one stipulation. You do need to get 10% of your voting population to sign a petition saying that you want this library. If you can do that, I will gladly send you the money. Now, back in those days, it was really difficult to get that petition signed because Canadian women were not legally considered a person back then. So therefore, they couldn't sign the petition. It had to be the guys. So the men really didn't want to sign that petition. They didn't like Carnegie. They really believed that he was a gentleman who built his business by exploiting his employees. So they didn't like him. Eventually, though, the ladies did go door to door for over a year, and they finally did get all the signatures they required. They sent it off to Carnegie, and he sent them the money, and they built the beautiful library. Now, over his lifetime, Carnegie did contribute to over 3,000 libraries worldwide. Out of all of those, more than 2,000 were actually in North America, and here in Canada, we had 125 libraries. Any guesses as to where the majority of those libraries are located?
In here.
Sorry?
In Calgary.
No, not in Calgary.
No.
Actually, in the province of Ontario.
Oh.
You guys have 112 of the Carnegie libraries.
Oh.
Now, out of all of those 3,000 plus libraries worldwide, there's only approximately 75 that are still today run as a library. Most of them have been converted to art galleries or museums, but our library is one of the 75 that is still operating as a library. What are your gas prices like in Ontario?
Okay, I don't know. But probably higher than here.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know it was 143 just a day or two back.
It is
Yesterday.
alright,
Actually, I paid, well actually I know I went to Costco yesterday, so it was 128 I think is what I paid. Yeah. Yeah.
Taxes are lower too, right?
Taxes?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't.
It's hard to tell because
is.
we only see Calgary taxes. We don't know what taxes in other cities are like. It's the problem. How do you compare something? They have their challenges just like every other city in keeping taxes down and still providing all the services that everybody wants to have.
Yes. So William Reeder actually was given a house to live in when he got the job of superintendent of parks and cemeteries. His house was actually here just on the left-hand side where all the trees are that you see there up on the hill. He lived up there his entire life as the superintendent of parks and cemeteries. He retired in December of I believe it was the 1940s that he retired, and about 3 weeks later he was out doing a slideshow, and on his way home he suffered a massive heart attack and died instantly. He was a gentleman who absolutely loved plants, so this was the most perfect job he could ever have. He would actually go out hiking into the Rockies and find plants he didn't know. He'd bring them home. He would plant them in his garden here on the left. And today you can go in through the Reeder Rock Garden and take a look at some of the plants that he would have planted in the 20s and 30s. On the hill here is Union Cemetery. This is our historic cemetery that will have a lot of the pioneers of Calgary that will be buried here. So a lot of people like the Lougheed family, William Reeder, Pat Burns, who was one of the gentlemen who put up money for the Stampede, and various other people who really started Calgary. On your right is another cemetery. This is the Asian cemetery, and a lot of the Asians came to North America back in the mid-1850s. They primarily came here to work in the gold mines originally, but after that they did get into other industries, and they did help both Canada and the United States build our railways. After the railway was built, a lot of them wanted to stay in the areas where they helped build that railway, and they did start their own businesses, things like the apothecaries, restaurants, laundromats, that sort of thing. Today in North America, of course, you can find a Chinese restaurant in all kinds of areas, little towns and cities all over North America. And one of the most popular dishes is actually the ginger beef, and the ginger beef dish was started right here in Calgary. the tradition of the free stampede breakfast began in 1923. We had a chuck wagon driver that was camped downtown, and he made the offer to make breakfast the next morning for his friends and family and any visitors to the city. And he served them pancakes, bacon, and really dark, strong cowboy coffee. And that became the traditional breakfast that you will find all over Calgary during Stampede. Now, that breakfast has actually grown into other areas, so you will always find the pancakes, bacon, and coffee, but you might also find things like interesting toppings for your pancakes. You might find some orange juice, sausages, as well as bacon, scrambled eggs, sometimes even baked beans. So it really depends on which one you go to, but you'll always get that traditional Stampede breakfast. A lot of places in the city that will hold those Stampede breakfasts will be at shopping centers, and so a lot of what will happen is that the shopping center merchants will, throughout the year, save up money so that they can throw the free Stampede breakfast. There is a shopping center that was built back in 1960, and they were built right on the edge of the city limits. And they wanted really for people to come out and check them out, so they decided to offer the Stampede breakfast. And in their first year, they did serve 10,000 breakfasts. That has now morphed into the Stampede breakfast of Stampede, and it happens the first Saturday, which is usually the first Saturday of July. Today they will serve approximately 40 to 60,000 breakfasts on that one morning. When Canada celebrated our 150th birthday, we had a lot of visitors out to this area, so they did serve the breakfast that Stampede, and they served over 100,000 breakfasts, which was huge. Now that shopping center is directly ahead of us on the right hand side. You'll see the Chinook Center. Chinook Center has now become the largest shopping mall within the city limits. And this is the shopping mall that people from all over Calgary will come to see. They have 5 major department stores in here, as well as full-service restaurants. There's a food kiosk and a food fair here in the middle that will serve approximately 900 people. There's approximately 36 different food kiosks throughout the mall and about 250 stores. You'll notice in the basement there is a bowling alley, and out in the far side of the mall at the other end is where you would find the IMAX theaters. There is about 16 movie screens in that theater. Directly ahead of us, there's also a bridge or a walkway that we will travel under. They built that a couple of years ago, and at the time I thought that was really sweet of the mall to build that, because this street we're on is McLeod Trail, and it's a pretty wide street and can be a very dangerous street to cross. To the left, about 2 blocks down, is where the C-train station is. So a lot of people that come to Chinook Mall will actually get off at the Chinook station and come here if they work here or they're coming to shop. They'll just take the C-train. So I thought, you know, this is really nice of the mall to build this bridge. Then I discovered why they actually built it. They did buy the land to the left, and they were going to be expanding the Chinook Mall to make it the largest shopping center within North America. However, the pandemic has now hit, and I don't know really what the plan is. So we're watching that to see what they might be doing. In the center of the mall, you'll also see that they have buried a time capsule there. So I would like to invite you to please come back and join us when we open that time capsule. It will be opened on December 31st, 2999. Calgary is on the prairies. We expand out when we want to build up the city. We don't actually have to build up like a lot of cities do. There's nothing in our way to restrict us. So as we build out, we will come across various towns and villages that already exist. We'll annex them into the city and they become a neighborhood within the city. Our mayor will cover off and look after the entire city, and our land mass is approximately 850 kilometers square. We do have a little bit of a higher elevation for a city. Our elevation is 1,080 meters. And because of that, we have less oxygen in the air. So when you find yourself getting a little tired over this next 8 days that you're here, it's more than likely because of the lack of oxygen in the air. You'll also notice that we are pretty landlocked here, so not a lot of moisture in the air. It's pretty dry here. So I would suggest that you drink a lot of water and that you use a lot of lotion. We're now heading up to Heritage Park. Heritage Park will be our next stop, and this is where we will get you into Gasoline Alley. And we'll talk to you a little bit more about the Gasoline Alley when we get up to the parking lot. Heritage Park is actually the largest living museum in Canada. It is a living museum because all of the exhibits that are in Heritage Park you can go into. So it's a pioneer village essentially, and there I can't remember how many buildings. I think there's 500 different exhibits or buildings here in the park, and it is open only in the summer. Really, it is now closed for the winter season. It will open again on the long weekend of May. But they did build out front a little plaza, and that is where they built Gasoline Alley, and that is open all year long. And Gasoline Alley is really a museum for historical gravitational gas pumps as well as antique vehicles. The train engine on the right has a lot of wheels compared to the one that's on the left. The reason for that is that the one on the right is actually a mountain train, and so when you're going up the mountains or coming down the mountain, you need to have a lot of torque and energy to get up and a lot of control to come down. And the way that you get that is by having more connection between your wheel and the rail line itself. So having more wheels gives you more control and torque and energy. The train on the other side, on the left-hand side, is a prairie train. It's also a diesel train, and so it just needs to travel quickly through the prairies, which are pretty flat, so they don't need to have all of that extra energy attached to it. Good point. So up ahead of us, you'll see a brick building with a clock tower in it. To the left of that is a yellow building. There are 4 buildings right there in the plaza that have little shops in them. So if you're interested in going through the shops, do allow yourself a little time to do that. Where we will be parking is in front of the Railway Cafe. The vehicle will be there, we will be there. So if you need us, that's where you'll find us. There is actually a bakery on the property here where they do bake a lot of their pastries, and so if you're interested in the pastries, they do have a really good cinnamon bun that they make. If you choose to get the cinnamon bun, then please make sure that you ask them to heat it for you if you're going to eat it right away. Get the cream cheese and do share because it is very large. If if one of you doesn't want to actually share, let me know. I'd be more than happy to help you out.